Dr. Peter Attia.
Dr. Peter Attia.
Dr. Peter Attia.
Dr. Peter Attia.
Attia wrote, and I quote, "You, the biggest problem with becoming friends with you is the life you lead is so outrageous, and yet I can't tell a soul." Now let's break that down because every word in that sentence matters. This is not a clinical consultation. This is not a one-time meeting at a conference in passing. This indicates a friendship.
What's up and welcome to Sam Miller Science, where you're joining me just over a decade into my personal journey of working to bridge the gap between metabolism, macros, muscle, and medicine, all while helping coaches scale the impact that they desire and deserve. If you are here, thank you so much for listening and for trusting me to help you elevate your coaching game or to lead you in your transformation to realize your true potential. In either case, each week I'll be sharing my methods, models, and message to serve as leverage for your specific goals. Without further ado, let's get on to today's show.
There are moments that serve as a stress test for an entire industry, a single event that forces everyone to pause, look at the foundations that we've built across the board, and ask really hard questions about what we're actually standing on. The recent revelations from the Department of Justice files concerning Dr. Peter Attia are one of those moments for the health and longevity space. I want to be clear from the start. This isn't about piling on. This isn't going to be bashing Dr. Attia. It's not about gossip or a takedown piece. It's about stepping back and asking critical questions that we as coaches and leaders of an industry must confront if we're going to do this work in health and wellness with integrity. What does this mean for the information that our clients consume on a regular basis on social media and podcasts? What does it mean for the trust that they place in us as professionals? And how do we actually lead in an industry when that trust is broken? Today, we're going to look at the data, the confirmed evidence-based facts of the situation, and then discuss the implications, not just for Dr. Attia, but for our entire industry and each of us as professionals, for the millions of people who get their health information from influencers and prominent figures online, whether that be social media or podcasts, and for us as coaches who are often left to pick up the pieces when that trust is violated in real time. Because our job is to cut through all of that and help people with their transformations in the real world. So let's start with what the data actually tells us. Because in an untrustworthy world, we have to look at this actual evidence. So if you go to the DOJ files, you're going to be able to see this for yourself. I'm not just taking things from social media. These are screenshots and evidence presented. We need to be precise about what we know and what we don't actually know, and we'll get to that in a bit. So on January 30th and 31st of this year, I happened to unplug for a bit because January 30th was actually my birthday. The Department of Justice released 3.5 million pages of files related specifically to Jeffrey Epstein and this case. Now, this was done in compliance with the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which was signed into law in November of last year. These are not leaked documents or leaked emails or a hoax. These are not rumors. These are actually official public records on the DOJ site. They're available for anyone to search. Just go to justice.gov/Epstein. I went there myself. I searched the database, and now I'm going to basically break down with you exactly what I found, especially related to health and wellness specifically. Among those millions of pages, Dr. Peter Attia's name appears over 1,700 times. 1,700. That's not a passing mention or just one or two emails or someone who just happened to show up at a party once. This is documented and basically an extensive relationship of what we're seeing. To understand the significance of this, we need to establish a baseline because context is everything, and the timelines and data start to become really important here as we build some sort of chronology in terms of the order of events. Jeffrey Epstein was convicted in 2008. He pled guilty to 2 different state charges in Florida, soliciting and procuring a minor for prostitution. He served 13 months in a private wing of the Palm Beach County Jail. This was not a secret. It was public knowledge. It was in the news, and it was widely reported. So anyone interacting with him after this time could have potentially known of these events. Anyone who knew him, associated with him after that point, knew what he had been convicted of. There's no ambiguity here in terms of the timeline. The email exchanges that we're going to discuss occurred between 2015 and 2018. So that's 7 to 10 years later after this conviction. This is not a case of being unaware or uninformed. This is a case of choosing to maintain a relationship with full knowledge of the person that you are dealing with. So let's look at the content of these emails. And I'm going to try my best to read these verbatim on the podcast. I think it's important that we don't necessarily sanitize this or soften it too much so you can all kind of understand what's going on clearly. Now, in June of 2015, 7 years after Epstein's conviction, Dr. Attia sent an email to Epstein. The subject line was RE or RE, got a fresh shipment. And in that email, Dr. Attia wrote, and I quote, "You, the biggest problem with becoming friends with you is the life you lead is so outrageous, and yet I can't tell a soul. Now let's break that down because every word in that sentence matters. First, he explicitly refers to becoming friends with you. So this is beyond that doctor-patient relationship and just a professional, cordial email. This is not a clinical consultation. This is not a one-time meeting at a conference in passing. This indicates a friendship. He's acknowledging that they have crossed over from professional acquaintance into personal relationship territory. And with someone as powerful as Epstein, maybe Attia is trying to get in his good graces here. Second, he describes Epstein's life as outrageous. Now, that word choice is important because it's certainly not neutral. It's not just like saying, oh, this person's interesting or you're a little unconventional. He used the terminology outrageous. That's an acknowledgement that what Epstein was doing was beyond what most people would consider normal or acceptable behavior. You can hypothesize that maybe he realizes, this isn't okay. Third, there's the phrase, I can't tell a soul, is the most damning part, because what that tells us is Dr. Attia understood that this relationship could be seen as problematic and maybe go beyond just basic doctor-patient confidentiality. So associating with Epstein could potentially damage his reputation, and so he kept it secret. That's not ignorance. That's potentially complying here in a murky situation. For a physician whose entire profession is built on a foundation of ethics, transparency, and trust, this admission of deliberate secrecy is a potentially profound ethical breach. It's a violation of the implicit contract between a health professional and the general public. Now, in February of 2016, so this is 8 years after Epstein's conviction, Dr. Attia sent another email to Epstein. The subject line was confirmed. And the content of that email was this, and I'm going to read again as close to verbatim as I can because it's important that we understand what was actually said. Now, they're talking about here sexual behavior. He says, pussy is indeed low carb. Still awaiting on the gluten content, though. Now, I'm not going to editorialize that, and I'm just going to kind of let that speak for itself. There's screenshots of this on the DOJ website. Now, this is coming from a licensed medical doctor communicating with a convicted sex offender and a child sex offender, no less, whose crimes were centered on the sexual abuse of women and girls. You start to think this is beyond just a joke between friends, and even if it was, aren't we a little beyond the locker room talk here? Who makes that type of joke to a sex offender, especially one towards children? Continued dealings with a pedophile presents an undeniable level of compatibility and empathy. This is where we start to get into the territory that this is beyond a joke between friends. And even if it was, isn't this kind of beyond just basic locker room banter? Who makes that kind of joke to a sex offender? Continued dealings with a pedophile presents a serious issue here. And how can we balance that as far as having empathy and respect that's required to be an effective health professional, let alone a doctor? In April of 2016, there was an email exchange about travel. Dr. Attia asked Epstein if he'd ever spent time in the Cayman Islands, and Epstein said no. And then Dr. Attia wrote, nothing like LSJ, I bet. Now, that is Little St. James. LSJ is Epstein's private island in the Caribbean. And then Dr. Attia added, I need to visit sometime, ... Now, between 2016, that island was already infamous, and it was already known, at least in certain circles, as a place associated with Epstein's criminal activities, because even Donald Trump, who's been called into question here, had called it a cesspool in 2015. So the reputation was out there that there's some questionable activities going on at the island. And yet Dr. Attia expressed a desire to visit, not just a casual, maybe someday, or, I need to visit sometime. The word need is a very interesting choice. It suggests some sort of desire to be a part of that world, to access that level of wealth and power and exclusivity. That's not a naive comment that you're making in passing, and it's not ignorance. It's actually a choice to prioritize access and association to highly affluent celebrity groups of people over basic moral and ethical considerations. Now, the temptation is certainly there, right? This is one of the most powerful people in the world, and you have other celebrities and incredibly wealthy people being associated with this circle and this island. Then in December 2018, just weeks after the Miami Herald published its groundbreaking expose, Dr. Attia emails Epstein to check in. Now, this Miami Herald investigation was a big deal. It was part of a series by journalist Julie K. Brown. It identified 80 of Epstein's victims. It detailed the injustice of this lenient plea deal, and it exposed the failures of the justice system. It was a moment of reckoning and the world being reminded in graphic detail of the scope of these crimes. And in the midst of that, Dr. Attia reached out to Epstein and he wrote, what is the fallout from the recent story? And then followed up, was there legally any change? ? His concern was for the legal well-being of a predator, not for the victims whose stories were finally being shared through the news story. There's no expression of outrage or frustration. And it wasn't just kind of a medical check-in on stress management or things like, do you have high blood pressure during this particular series of events? It was just a check-in on the legal situation, which tells you where priorities were at the time when most reasonable people likely would have either sought to create space from the relationship or really brought it to a clinical focus and not talking about any more friendly or just general touch-based style details. Now, before we move on, I want to address something else because part of being evidence-based is correcting misinformation. There's been a lot of misinformation floating around in the wake of this release about other individuals. In the days following the release of these files, there were social media posts claiming that several other health or medical influencers were also named in the Epstein files. I saw these posts. A lot of people, saw these or spread these and shared them rather quickly. So I went to the official DOJ library myself. I typed in their names and I hit search. The result in many of these cases was 0 mentions, not one. So the claim in some of these cases is false. So you have to be careful with this and these accusations. Now, why am I taking the time to point this out? It's because we have to be rigorous about dispelling falsehoods, just like we are in confirming facts. So that's what it means to actually be evidence-based. We don't want to spread rumors or have background conversations or spread unverified claims just because they're sensational or because it confirms someone else's bias. So we have to actually deal in the data here of what's been shared in the files. If we're going to criticize someone for lack of integrity, we have to demonstrate integrity ourselves. We have to be the standard that we want to see inside of the industry. So this brings us to the central question, the question that millions of people, many of our clients or people following along in terms of their own interest in health and longevity are now asking themselves. Can you trust the information from someone who's demonstrated such a profound lack of judgment? Even if there's no criminal case or civil case or any type of proceeding, this is where we need to apply systems thinking, because this isn't just about one person and it's not just about Dr. Attia, even though it's his name in the emails. It's how we evaluate authority in the health and wellness space. How do we assess risk? How do we guide people in a world that's increasingly untrustworthy? So I'm going to give you guys an analogy, and I use analogies and stories a lot because they help us see patterns across different domains, even in areas or certain things we may not even understand. It just helps us to think more clearly and kind of step outside the box that we're in. So imagine you're working with a financial analyst or planner. This person has built a brilliant algorithm and they say that they're great at picking stocks. They've tested it over decades of market data and the results seem pretty impressive and lots of people follow them on social media. The system's logical, it seems sound, and on paper, this person seems like an expert. They have credentials, they have a track record, and they speak with confidence. But then you find out something about their personal life. This analyst is personally bankrupt, terrible at budgeting or managing their money. They're reckless. They've ignored their own system. They've gambled away everything. Their personal finances are a disaster. Now, would you trust their algorithm? Would you follow their financial advice? Would you want to give them your money to manage? Well, you might say, well, the data is still good. The system still works. Their personal failures don't invalidate the research, right? And in some case, maybe that's true on some level. The math doesn't change just because the person doing the math has poor judgment. But here's the problem with that logic. If they can't apply their own system to their own life, if they can't exercise the judgment and discipline that they're asking you to trust, then there's a flaw somewhere. There's basically a disconnect, and that disconnect presents a risk to you. Character is the operating system for judgment. A flaw in the character is a flaw in the system. You can have all the right information and data and equations and the right protocols, but if the operating system is corrupted, the outputs are going to be unreliable. And I think we're seeing a lot of these issues right now in functional medicine, health optimization, longevity, and more. So this podcast is not about cancel culture. I know that term gets thrown around a lot and people are tired of it. This isn't about canceling someone or bashing someone for making a mistake or a bad tweet or a difference of opinion. This segment of this show specifically is about risk assessment. And especially if you're a health professional, we are risk mitigators for our clients, whether it's exercise, nutrition, or poor diet. We help them navigate a world of conflicting information, predatory marketing, bad advice, and outright scams on the internet. We help them separate this so that they can stay safe and make better decisions. And part of that job is helping them evaluate sources, not just of information or programs, but also people. Who should they listen to? Who should they trust? And what information is actually reliable? We cannot and should not ignore the character data. It's as relevant as any clinical trial or meta-analysis because health is not just about information and research studies. A lot of this comes down to judgment. It's decision-making and building self-trust over time. There's another principle that I talk about pretty frequently, and that's using the actual data from someone's health and fitness transformation and also using empathy. So if you're working with clients on their health, you have to care about them as people, not just data points in a check-in. You have to see their struggles, their context, and just see them as people. You have to meet them where they are. Otherwise, the programs and approaches aren't going to work. So empathy is not just a soft skill in our industry. It's a core competency, and it's what allows you to understand why a client is struggling when they're struggling. It's what allows you to tailor your approach to their specific needs, and it's what actually builds trust, especially in complex or difficult situations. When I look at the emails that we just discussed, I see a couple problems and honestly, a little bit of a lack of empathy. I see someone who's willing to make vulgar jokes with a sex offender, a man whose crimes were centered around the sexual abuse of young girls. I see someone who is more concerned about the legal fallout for this predator than the victims whose lives were destroyed in that situation. And maybe I'm missing context or text messages or phone calls, but all I see is the emails. And if that empathy is absent in one domain, we have to question, can it truly be present in a coaching relationship or a therapeutic setting? It's not something that's just this on-off switch, right? It's a core part of who you are. It's a reflection of your values, your character, and your clinical operating system. Let's zoom out, because this event is a symptom of a larger cultural trend that we as coaches and just people interested in our health need to understand if we're going to navigate this season effectively. We are living in an era of guru seeking. People are looking for a single source of truth. They want someone to follow, a protocol to adopt without question, a leader who will tell them exactly what to do, someone who seems to have all the answers. And I get it. I really do. The world is overwhelming. There's so much information out there. There's conflicting studies and conflicting posts on social media, too many voices claiming to have the answer. It can be exhausting at times. It's paralyzing, especially if you don't know what you're doing with your health. So people look for a shortcut. They look for someone who seems confident, who seems to have the credentials on paper, who seems to have that platform online and has that big following, and they outsource their thinking to that person. They say, I don't have the time to figure this out for myself, so I'm just going to do what this person says. I'm going to plug their podcast in. I'm going to follow their posts. And on the surface, that seems reasonable. We do this in other areas of life, right? Maybe we trust a mechanic to fix our car or an accountant to do our taxes. We defer to other people's expertise all the time. But here's the problem when you put your trust in one person, especially with your health, something as complex and as personal as your internal health. You become vulnerable and you become susceptible to their flaws, their biases, and their blind spots. And when that person fails, and in many cases they will fail because everyone is human, you're left with nothing. Your foundation crumbles and now you're confused again and unsure of what to do with your health. So this is why the role of a coach is so fundamentally different than the role of a guru on social media. A guru gives answers. A guru doesn't teach people how to ask better questions. A guru builds dependence while a coach builds self-trust. A guru says, follow me, when a coach says, I'm going to help you find this way on your own using the tools that we'll build together. And right now in this moment, the world needs more coaches than ever because the institutions people used to trust are failing them, even people who are doctors and coming from medical institutions. Traditional healthcare is broken. Primary care visits are like 7 minutes long. Doctors are burned out. They're often overwhelmed and influenced by outside sources. They can't always address root causes in that 7-minute visit. And so they're left with just managing symptoms and writing prescriptions. In many situations and circumstances, the pharmaceutical industry has the potential to be predatory as well, which then adds insult to injury in this particular case. Many of these companies are more interested in creating lifelong customers than actually healing people. Now, that's maybe not true of every single medication, but it's certainly true in many cases. Now, that doesn't mean the wellness industry is completely innocent either, because natural supplements and herbals can have the same problems. The wellness industry is full of gimmicks and snake oil. Every week, there's a new infomercial product, protocol, a new biohack that promises to solve all your problems. And in many cases, a good chunk of this stuff is garbage. Some of it can be good, but there's certainly some bad stuff too. People are looking for someone they can actually trust, who will take the time to understand them and build a relationship and give them honest and evidence-based guidance. And most importantly, someone who actually cares. That someone is us. And so all of you listening to this who want to help people with their health, this is for you. But here's the thing. We can only be that trusted guide if we actually hold ourselves to a higher standard and lead by example, because we can't just borrow credibility from someone else's platform or someone else's research. We can't just say, well, Dr. So-and-so said this, so it must be true, because we've got to be really careful now because look, that happened with Dr. Attia. We have to build our own authority. client by client, result by result, transformation by transformation on a foundation of integrity, empathy, real outcomes, and relationships. And when we see a major figure in our industry fail that particular standard, we have to be willing to acknowledge it, not because we want to tear them down or that they're completely a bad person in every area of their life or because we're jealous or resentful, but because we want to protect our clients and elevate the health and wellness profession as a whole. We have to be willing to say, this is not okay. This is not the standard we aspire to. This is not what coaching or a medical relationship should look like. So where do we go from here? What do we actually do with this information, the Epstein files, the emails, and what I've shared with you in today's show? First, we have to reaffirm a commitment to being a guide, especially if you're someone who works in the health and wellness profession. Authority is not built on a personality cult or associating with a questionable circle of celebrities. It's not built on borrowed knowledge from a prominent figure or some sort of viral protocol or a best-selling book. It's built client by client on a foundation of trust, evidence, and genuine care. That means that we actually do the work, whether that's reading the studies, understanding the mechanisms, the deeper inner health components in physiology and biochemistry. We track the data, we stay current, we question our assumptions and biases, we update our beliefs when new evidence emerges over time. But we also are here to listen. We ask questions, we meet our clients where they are. We don't just hand them a protocol and walk away. We don't treat them like data points. We actually see them as whole entire people with complex lives and relationships and unique challenges that come up. We walk with them and lead by example because that's what a guide does. And you can also lead by example, even if you're not a coach, just by leading by example with your exercise, your nutrition, and your lifestyle. Now, if you are a coach though, we have to empower clients to become their own health authority as well. We have to teach them how to evaluate information, how to ask critical questions and recognize red flags, whether it's in real time or on social media, how to distinguish between things that are evidence and just marketing and hype that's kind of masking the true evidence. We build their internal locus of control so they're less susceptible to the influence of any single charismatic figure, no matter how popular or credentialed that person might be. Because here's the truth. The best outcome for a client is not that they need you forever, for all time. The best outcome is they actually learn to trust themselves and they develop the skills and confidence to make good decisions on their own, that they become self-sufficient. Now, if they still want to work with you and they hire you again for a new program, that's fine. But what real coaching looks like is actually playing that long game. And finally, we have to recognize our own value. I know so many health professionals and coaches struggle with this. I hear it all the time. You see the big names and the massive platforms and the best-selling books and the $100,000 a year concierge practices, and you think, I'm just a coach. I only have 20 clients, or I only have a few thousand followers on social media. What impact am I really making? It's a question I see all the time. And even people who aren't coaches, right? Like you don't think that you're having an impact just going to the gym for your workout or posting your health journey on social media, but you are. Here's what I want you to understand. In a world where trust in large institutions and prominent figures is eroding daily, the coach-client relationship is more valuable than ever. And community relationships are important too. So you're the last line of defense against misinformation and poor judgment. You're the person that other people, your peers at the gym or online, turn to when they don't know who else to trust. You're the one who actually takes the time to understand them, listen to them, and care about them. These relationships built on integrity and genuine care are worth more than a celebrity doctor with 1 million followers. It's worth more than some random protocols and recommended pharmaceuticals in his book. It's worth more than a viral post or just a magazine feature. Because at the end of the day, health is a very personal and incredibly individual thing. It's not a one-size-fits-all protocol. It's not a guru lecturing to you on a stage telling you what to do. It's more about these interpersonal relationships and figuring out what works for you. This is our time to set that standard, to show what true leadership in health looks like. It's not typically flashy. It's not viral. It's not about just only building your personal brand and chasing clout or trying to become the next celebrity doctor or celebrity trainer. It's about being consistent, both in your own health journey, but also in how you show up for others. And this character that we've talked about, this integrity that we've discussed, basically becomes the operating system for everything else, whether it's related to nutrition, supplements, or anything else. So really, this entire episode is not just about Dr. Attia. It's about all of us holding ourselves to a higher standard because the world is watching, your peers are watching, clients are watching, and I think everyone right now is looking for someone they can trust. So let that be us. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If this resonated with you, please share this with another person who needs to hear it. You can tag me in your stories. I'm at Sam Miller Science. And anytime you leave a rating and review, helps us support the work that my team and I do here. We put out over 800 episodes of free content. And the greatest gift you could ever give me is just to bring me a friend, lend me their ear, and allow us to share this education with them. If you're watching on video, please smash that subscribe button and hit a thumbs up if you're on YouTube to help support this content. If you're on Spotify, leave that 5-star rating and share the show with a friend. It all goes a really long way into supporting the work that we do here and growing this community of like-minded individuals. I appreciate you guys, and I will talk to you in the next episode. This show is designed to help you translate complex nutrition, fitness, and physiology concepts into leverage for your clients' goals or your own personal goals. This podcast is for online education, meaning this podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. And no doctor-patient or coach-client relationship is formed through listening to this episode. The use of information in this podcast and the show notes or the reliance on the information provided is done at the listener's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and is for educational purposes only. Always consult your physician before beginning any exercise program, and users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such condition. By accessing this podcast and any other episode, the listener acknowledges that the entire contents and design of this podcast are the property of Oracle Athletic Science and should not be used or retransmitted without permission of Oracle Athletic Science. This is protected under U.S. and international copyright and trademark laws. Except as where otherwise provided herein, users of this podcast may save and use the information contained in this podcast only for personal or other non-commercial educational purposes. No other use, including without limitation, reproduction, retransmission, or editing of this podcast may be made without prior written permission of Oracle Athletic Science and Sam Miller, which may be requested through the contact information in the show notes. By accessing this podcast, the listener acknowledges that Oracle Athletic Science makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast, and coaches and listeners understand that this information may change over time with different research and anecdotal practices in the field. It is the listener's responsibility to stay up to date on this information. As always, this show is designed to help you, and I appreciate you listening to every episode. Simply understand it's for general informational and educational purposes, and we'll talk to you in the next episode.